Welcome to this week's episode of BurnerCast, the only podcast that talks about anything and everything hot air ballooning. Hi again, everybody. I'm Joey Strutz, joined again by Brad Hosmer and McKenna Seacrest, my two co-hosts. How are you guys doing tonight?
Well, yeah, pretty good, I guess. Another BurnerCast episode. Here we are. What is this episode? I don't know. We've been doing this for a while. We're having a blast doing it. We're glad to be serving the ballooning community. That's all we got to say.
McKenna?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited for this one. Mandy's been a really big mentor to me, just getting my pilot certificate. So I'm excited to talk to her.
Well, as McKenna previously mentioned, we do have Mandy Johnson on the podcast with us tonight. She was an Aerostar dealer for many years. She earned her repairman certificate in 1988 and her pilot certificate in 1993. Also has gotten rewards from the FAA, including Instructor of the Year and Friends of the FSDO Award. So without further ado, let's welcome Mandy Johnson to the show. All right, welcome to the show, Mandy.
Thank you. Great to be here.
That's great to have you on. We had Vic on a couple weeks ago, and great to have you on now too.
Yeah, that was kind of fun to listen to Vic tell some of his stories and that kind of stuff. And we actually discovered a story that we didn't know about each other through doing that. So the very first balloon I ever saw, it was actually Vic tethering behind his parents' business before we ever met each other. And we didn't know that. So it was kind of fun.
Well, we're going to start off tonight with just that, actually. How did you get your start in hot air ballooning?
Well, I married Vic. So it's really just that simple. So no, I knew nothing about balloons. I'm not like all you guys that grew up in ballooning and, you know, that kind of stuff. I saw a balloon one time before I met Vic and, didn't think that much about it. I was gone all summer and I actually met Vic right when I got back from summer vacation. And it was my senior year in high school. He was out of school already. And if he was ballooning that fall, I didn't know it because we had just started dating and those kind of things. And usually by October, there's not much flying in Western Washington anyway. So we actually got married fairly quickly. And so by spring, I had no idea that he was even a balloonist. I didn't know at all. So we had gotten married. My parents moved to Alaska and we had gotten married so that I wouldn't have to go with them. And then we decided to move to Alaska anyway. So we went to Alaska and we were driving down the road. It was like February or March, lots of snow. And we saw a balloon fly over and Vic says to me, "Hey, I know that guy." And I was like, "Yeah, sure you do." I thought he was still trying to impress me, right? So he follows this balloon and pulls over and disappears for quite a while. And I got really used to that, sitting in the car in the snow with Vic disappearing and balloons around. And for the next several months, that's what ballooning looked like for me. So he really did know that guy and started going out crewing in Alaska and taking some flight lessons and different things like that. The next winter, we had our first kid. And so I was perfectly fine with him getting up early in the morning and going flying, and I didn't have to worry about it too terribly much. And then he started talking about wanting to buy one. So that made it kind of serious. And I was like, well, I don't know if that's what we should be spending our money on, and we just had a kid and we were just getting started. So anyway, I started going out with him a little bit more. I had actually, when I was pregnant, been robbed at gunpoint by a guy in a ski mask. And so going out flying in the snow in Alaska and everyone wearing ski masks, it didn't even sound like fun to me. So like I said, I spent a lot of time in the truck watching for quite a while. My very first Mother's Day, he wanted to go out ballooning. I was like, "No, this is my Mother's Day. You should stay home with me." And the people started calling at 4:00 in the morning. They really needed him for crew that day. They had a lot of people booked. So they finally convinced me to come out with our then 5-month-old baby. And I sat in the back of a 15-passenger van and watched all these women go for these balloon flights. They did 2 bounce flights, I think. And after they landed the second time, by then I was pretty cranky. And they said they had the women load up and take off, and they got me and baby out of the car. And they strapped the car seat into the balloon and they said, "Okay, it's your turn. Let's go for a balloon ride." And so that was my first balloon ride on my first Mother's Day. I still wasn't 100% convinced that ballooning was all that in a bag of chips, but especially because I don't like heights either. But it was a very beautiful place to fly, and those people went way out of their way to make me feel really good on my first Mother's Day. They made me a special brunch afterward, that kind of stuff. And I flew one other time, I think in Alaska, before we came back to Washington. So, and by then Vic had started learning to fly from Luana Seaver here in Washington State. And she was, we had our second kid on the way, and she was like, well, you should probably get a little bit more involved in this so you can kind of see what he's doing. So we started at the repair station. I actually got my repair rating before I even considered thinking of flying. I didn't think that was going to be in my future. So I learned to repair first. By the time our third kid was on the way, there's a balloon rally here in Washington State in Walla Walla. For years, it was on Mother's Day weekend. They've kind of bounced the date around a little while. To me, that was another strike against ballooning, but we went to that event that year, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a night glow. And so I was sitting in the back of the truck with the kids, and Vic said, I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm just going to go help those guys over there. And I didn't see him for 2 hours, and he took the keys, and I was stuck in the middle of this field where I knew nobody. So by then we had 3 kids. I did know about, a little bit about repair at that point. Luana had an old balloon. She had us rebuilding. That was an awesome experience. And that's really when I fell in love with designing balloons, because she had us color lots and lots of different ideas for rebuilding that balloon. I had a lot of fun. I really got into the naming of balloons and trying to figure out what they should look like and things like that. And so that's kind of where it all started for me.
I think that's such an interesting story. And I love how Vic he never told you that he was a balloonist till you were dating for such a long time. I think that's so funny.
Yep. Yeah, he kept that as one of his surprises in his pocket for after we got married. So
like, hey, I'm a balloon pilot.
Yeah, I probably would have said, yeah, sure, whatever. Anyway, so no, it wasn't like it was the time of year he could take me out and show me what it was all about, So,
So
yeah.
in regards to repairing, it's kind of unique that you that's the path you took to ballooning, was instead of getting your pilot certificate first, you got into the repair side of it. So when you went to get your pilot's license, was it almost easier to you because you almost knew every backside of the balloon and all that? Or how was that to you?
Definitely the section about balloons and how they function and all the parts and that kind of stuff was super easy for me. But I seem to, the universe got its laugh at me, if you will. The year that I got my license was when they were right in between of transitioning from the old controlled, uncontrolled airspaces to the new ABC stuff. So I had to do my written with airspaces one way. And then when I actually got to go take my flight check and oral and all that kind of stuff, I had to do it the other way. So I had to learn airspaces both ways in that time period between getting my pilot's or my private and my commercial. So over that 1.5 period was right in that transition. And so it was kind of like, okay, yeah. So the repair part was super easy, but then I got that part, which was, I had to learn it twice.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, but it definitely was nice on the repair side. I think it helped a lot, just in terms of really understanding the equipment, how it functioned, things that could go wrong, that kind of stuff. I started out flying with Vic. We hadn't been married that long at that point. And so communication was a little tough, I think, sometimes. So I figured out that I needed to start learning from some other pilots as well. So I flew with a lot of different people. But 2 of my main instructors were very, very focused on safety. One of them, Mark Yonker, who I did a lot of my flying with, he actually, every flight was an emergency of some kind. So he would turn off tanks, he would turn off pilot lights, he would hold open my vent. I came back to breakfast one day and I was explaining to everybody, yeah, today I lost my pilot light and I had a leak at my blast valve and my vent line stuck open and all these other things. And then I realized that Vic had brought some of his passengers for breakfast and their eyes were super big and they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know all those things could go wrong. And it's like, whoa, we were simulating. So, but it definitely helped with that kind of stuff. So.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So I know you have some funny stories about like strange things you've seen as a balloon repairman and like experiences you have with that.
Well, I'm just going to say with social media, ballooning has changed a lot. There are a lot of things that people used to do, I think, that they don't do anymore because they're afraid that they'll get caught on camera or somebody will share it with the world or whatever. So you don't see as much crazy stuff as you used to, but it was fairly common. You know, the pilots back in the day were, everyone has a personality, right? And so, I mean, you still see that with pilots now, but they were a lot more boisterous about it, I think, back then. And so you would find things in the basket, you know, the most tame things were their toys, right? So a lot of them would take fishing poles with them, and some people had their own special whistles they had to have and all those kind of things. But then there were the people that were a little off color, and we would find things like whips and underwear and lingerie. And, you know, sometimes I wondered, did they leave this in here on purpose for us to find it? Or did they forget? Were they supposed to be putting it on, or were they taking it off? Or where did this even come from, you know? So I did have one pilot, I asked him about a particular piece of lingerie that we found. He was super, super embarrassed, and he sent his crew to get the balloon. So yeah.
See, I used to actually help at a repair station back in Kalamazoo, Michigan when I was high school and early college. And
Yep.
I have one interesting story about those years. So the guy just had his house in a nice neighborhood. So he just kind of laid out in his driveway in his yard. And it's probably 3:00 in the afternoon. And all of a sudden behind me, I hear this loud bang. And I thought maybe a car hit a box or something. No. Middle of the day, neighborhood, car hits a deer. Almost, this deer comes sliding across the road, almost ends up on the balloon that's laid out. It's maybe 2 or 3 feet behind me. It just dies there. Like,
Oh my gosh.
talk about random stuff. No,
Yes.
it was just like, you couldn't script it if you tried. No,
Yeah.
it's funny you mentioned like lingerie and stuff. So Joey and I were at a little friends get together party for ballooning a couple of years back. And somehow we found this Rhino Max box. And those of you that don't know what Rhino Max is, look it up. And we took out the pillbox, whatever, and we hid it in his basket. And his basket was actually going to Leon, Mexico for the event in a couple months.
That's awesome.
It made it all the way down to Mexico in one piece. Nobody ever took it out. And from that week on, he was known as Rhino Max by his local crew in Mexico. So yes, we all have our little games we play with people. So
Yep.
On that kind of similar topic, have you ever found anything crazy inside a balloon at an annual, or nothing too wild?
You know, probably the lingerie and, you know, maybe a few sex toys or whatever was the wildest thing, you know, in the basket. So I heard stories back in the day when they used to do all kinds of different things to each other, but I think they didn't do that as much when we had the repair station with Luana, because I think they were all worried that she would kind of frown down on them a little bit about that. So, you know, while there was a few wild things here and there, it wasn't totally crazy.
Yeah, it really all depends on how good of friends you are with them. If you know you can get away with it and it's not going to be awkward at the next balloon event or whatever. I mean, there's
Exactly.
stuff. I mean, it's stuff. Trust me, there's stuff I did at balloon events as a kid that I would not do now for sure. Like
Exactly.
now that I'm grown, 25 with the license, I'm like, no. There's certain things you can do as crew and kind of mess around with per se in ballooning. Like once you get to a certain age, you're like, yeah, we got to be serious here. I'm sure Joey can vouch for some of those stories about me.
Yep. Oh yeah, I used to see pilots hanging out of hotel room windows, swinging from side to side, you know, going from one window to another on the little ledges and stuff with their champagne and stuff after flights, and jumping out of hotel room windows into the swimming pool, stuff like that. You just don't see that kind of stuff anymore.
That's wild.
At least not up here.
No. So what was it like flying balloons in the 90s and being around ballooning around that time as a female pilot?
You know, I really reflected on that question when you asked me that. And I think we were really lucky in the Northwest, because from the very early days, there were a couple of very strong women in ballooning, both in the air and on the ground. You know, strong crew women. There were a couple of different women that would have all women crew. And so we've always been really lucky in the Northwest. You know, a recent Prosser balloon rally, they took a picture of the women there, and more than half the field were women. And so I don't know how common that is across the country. It doesn't sound like it's that common. But in the Northwest, from early on, there were 2 or 3 really good women. And actually on the day that I soloed, when I took off from the field, I observed, I was at Walla Walla, and that was back when they used to have 50 balloons at Walla Walla. And most of the balloons were flying one particular direction, and 2 or 3 balloons were going a different direction. And it dawned on me those 2 or 3 balloons were the women, and they all kind of stuck together and they were flying a different direction. So I thought, I think I can follow where they're going. And they landed at this field on some really nice grass, and I came flying in, and they had no idea I was going to be there to solo, and they were very enthusiastic and very encouraging. And my husband had no idea where I went, because I actually radioed the crew to leave the field before he got back to where they were at. So my crew showed up there, and it was just really nice to have such strong women personalities and people in ballooning back then. And I really do think it's what's attributed to as many women as there are in the Northwest flying.
I feel like we still have a lot of female pilots in the Northwest compared to most other places, which is pretty cool.
That's what I hear. Yeah, it is cool.
Yeah. So can you think of something that someone you've flown with has told you that has stuck with you and like changed the way you think about flying?
Well, like I said, when I was flying, when I was learning to fly, I actually didn't get my license till I had 30 or 40 hours. Like I said, I was doing a lot of balloon repair. Vic was doing a lot of flying. We had young kids. And I was flying with lots of different people and getting lots of different experience. But the ones that I watched fly and that I really respected some of the things they did, all of them were very, very focused on safety. So they would always talk to me about always being prepared, practice emergencies. And I would find that they would actually ask questions. We were driving down the road. Okay, you're coming into this field from this direction. Tell me what your approach would look like and how you would land here. Go. And then they say, okay, same thing again. Now you're going 15 miles an hour. Go, and stuff like that. And I still find myself driving around. I'll look at a field. I'll figure out where the power lines are, where are the light standards, what direction's the wind blowing, what would I do to come in? And I think those scenarios through in my head a lot. And because it took so many hours till I finally got my license, I did a lot of simulated stuff with different people, because it got to the point, once you know the basics, for some reason, I think a lot of the people that I flew with were a little more resistant to actually signing off a student back then. Everybody was scared about, they had just started talking about the liability of being an instructor. And once you sign somebody off, if they ever do anything wrong, it's your fault. And so I had a whole lot of pilots tell me, one more flight like that, and I'll sign you off to solo, or I'll sign you off for your license. And I got really tired of hearing that. So, but, after flying with several different pilots for 30 or 40 hours, you start to do a lot of simulation stuff. And that's really stuck with me even today. I think about if I got stuck over, I did one time get stuck over power lines, and there were trees on either side of it. And all I could think was, if I just get blown off these power lines, I already know what my tree landing looks like, because I had practiced it in my brain so many times. I had all my passengers put on their helmets, and I was like, please just blow me over the trees and I'm going to land in them. And I lucked out, and the big clearing came up, and I happened to land in the big clearing, and my passengers looked at me and I said, I was just kidding. We were just, practicing. So, so always be prepared. Think through every scenario you can.
Now, I'm curious if the rest of you guys think this way. I always, no matter where I'm driving around and I see a decent field or a decent house, and I'm always like, that could be a good launch spot. Like, does anybody else ever do that, no matter where you are?
Like, can I land there?
Yeah, can I land there? Can I launch there? Would that make a good target? Like, I always think like that, no matter where I am. It's hilarious, I think.
I feel like that's such a curse as a balloon pilot, though, because
yes, it is.
Especially after getting my license. I already thought that before getting my license. Especially after getting my license, every time I'm driving through somewhere, if I'm up at school or whatever, it's like, oh, hey, this might not be a bad area to fly. Maybe one day.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, I think that we just got back from driving down to visit my mom in Utah, and there were so many valleys we went through. This would be flyable. We could launch over there. We could go over there. This would be so cool. And other ones where it's like, oh, I'd never want to fly here. So, yeah.
Funny. And then you and Vic have flown a lot kind of in the Kent Auburn area. And that's kind of where I fly. I've been flying there in the summers for the balloon company. So I was curious, do you have any interesting stories from your flights in that area of Western Washington?
Well, we were actually flying back then down in the valley, in the Auburn Kent Valley. Where you guys are flying out now is more up on the plateau toward Enumclaw. And when we were flying down there, it's interesting now because we'll drive down the road and it's like, there's the field where Vic got his license. Well, no, it's really a Safeway. There's the field where I landed from my commercial flight. Well, nope, that's a mall. There's the field where we did this, that, and the other thing. And if you look at pictures from back then, it's changed so much. So it was very interesting to watch the area develop and really determine when is it really not a great idea to be flying there anymore. And everyone was a little bit scared of the Enumclaw Plateau back then because of the winds and closer to the mountain and closer to the hills and all of that. And so it took us a lot of years to go, okay, out of necessity, we need to start flying out there a little bit more and really figure out what this looks like and stuff. And we did a lot of drop line landings. Flying out in Enumclaw, we don't do quite as many as we did back then, but there were lots and lots of drop line landings, often into parking lots. When people were getting their license back in the 90s, then we would have a lot of discussions with the FAA over suitable areas to land because there were lots and lots of parking lots from warehouses they were building. And it was, is it okay to land there? Is it not okay to land there? And, they kind of felt like on the weekends when they're not operating, there's nobody around. So sure, you could treat it like an open field, but during the week when there's trucks going in and out and lots of cars and people and stuff, no, that wouldn't be a suitable place to be. So it was like our landing area was changing, all the time right in front of us. So it was interesting.
And then do you have any interesting or like crazy stories about landing experiences you've had and like having to pack out of certain places?
So I have a personal thing about packing out. I will work my butt off to not have to carry equipment out. Part of that is from a student that I have had. Every single flight we did, he landed somewhere that we had to pack out, like literally take the basket apart, take the tanks out, lift stuff over fences, things like that. I had enough experiences like that, early on, that my personal credo, if you will, is we're going to land somewhere we can get out of, period, end of story.
Yeah.
And, we're going to do everything we can to fly to a place that's good to land. And I will often tell my crew before I take off, hey, today, this is where I'm thinking about landing, and I'll work, really hard to get there. But yeah, I've landed in parks that were so small, you had to bring the balloon straight down. You couldn't pull it over. We've landed in places behind gates where you had to take everything apart to get it out. I did personally one time land in an area that we landed in a lot on an evening flight. Everything should have been fine. Took us a little bit longer to get out of there than normal. And when we got up to the top of the hill, it was actually a gated road. And it was a municipality that ran that area. And so they had actually shut and locked the gate on us. And it was starting to get dark. And so back then, your cell phone didn't work everywhere. And so we tried to get a hold of somebody to come and let us out. We couldn't find anybody. And so we literally spent from that was probably when sunset was around 8 or 9 o'clock at night. They didn't get it there to let us out till 4:30 the next morning. So we spent the night in the van, taking turns, telling stories. None of us had dinner. Everybody ate every last mint they could find, every piece of gum they could find. And there was about 4 of us stuck behind that gate for a long time. So that would be one. I've had lots of experiences, especially as areas started getting more populated, where we get a little more upset landowners, and they would come out and they would yell at my passengers in the basket, because in their mind, there was no way that the woman in the basket could be the pilot. So, I've had to a couple of times step between a landowner and a passenger and say, I was the pilot, you can talk to me. And that usually took all of that upset away from them. They would stutter for a few minutes and most of the time just disappear. Stuff like that. Stuff happens to all of us, right? I had one time where my turning vent got stuck the whole flight, and I did pretty quick circles. That particular balloon, the turning vents worked extremely well. And so flying in a circle and making it approach the land while all that air is still coming out and of course that night I ended up kind of on the side of a hill, was quite an experience. So yeah.
That would have been interesting.
Very.
The thing you said was kind of funny about how, like, when people realized you were the pilot, they had a whole different view.
Yep.
I've had so many landings, especially as like a brand new pilot, where I'd land my balloon and then like my dad or whoever would drive up, and then someone would walk up to my dad and be like, oh yeah, you're the pilot and all this stuff, even though like they saw him drive up. And then he's like, no, like my daughter's the pilot. Like, it's so funny.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, totally crazy how they just, stereotype, who the pilot's going to be. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay, weird.
So when we had Vic on the other day or whatever it was, I don't remember how long ago it was. It seems like ages ago. I'm not sure how many episodes ago it was, but anywho, we got his story about being the Aerostar dealer and having that stuff back in the day. I want your perspective on that. What did you think of that? What was the pros? What was the cons? Kind of talk about that.
I really enjoyed our interactions with the dealers, and Luana made sure we got involved early on, going to the factories and learning a lot about the balloons directly from the factories. And when we got into being dealers, I fell in love with designing balloons. And one of the things that I really enjoyed the most was targeting a customer and trying to figure out what balloon would be so appealing to them that when they saw it, they would have to have it. And I got into a pretty good routine about the point where we were taking over the distributorship toward the end days of Aerostar. I had a couple of balloons in a row that I designed them with someone in mind. We bought it and brought it home, and I would do 2 or 3 flights, and the person that I designed it for would go, I have to have that balloon. I can't stand to watch you fly it. How much is it? Here you go. I got to take it home. So I really, really loved, kind of getting into people's dreams, if you will. I was accused of doing that a lot, pulling out of them what it was that they wanted in a balloon and then designing it for them. So I thought that was pretty cool. And, having had the repair station, being a dealer, was nice to have just a little bit more access to the factory and being able to call and ask people questions if we had any, those kind of things. And we've gone through a lot of balloons over the years. I sat down and thought about it, and we've probably bought and sold between 50 and 100 balloons, and personally owned real close to 50 balloons. Now, like I said, some of them we only owned them for a couple of days, and some of them we owned for several years. So, and then I had fun, figuring out the personality of the pilot and looking at the balloon and that kind of stuff and naming them. We've had a lot of fun naming balloons over the years. So
I'm assuming, since you've owned so many Aerostars, you've flown both spring and Velcro top.
Oh yeah.
So what is your take on a spring top compared to a Velcro top?
Let's see. There's no way I would own a spring top ever again. I would take a full Velcro top over a spring top any day. So now I still have a couple of customers that have them. When you want to vent, you want to vent. And in a spring top, you just don't have a whole lot of venting surface area to open those suckers up. So, but yeah, we've had rip tops, para rip, spring top, you name it, we've had it. We actually converted our first balloon that we flew, that we built, that we got from Luana, was a Velcro top when we got it. We converted it to a parachute top in the 2000s with the factory's help. And one time, one of the factory engineers came and flew with us, and he looked up as he was venting, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the biggest parachute I've ever seen," because the Velcro tops were bigger. And when we converted it to a parachute top, that was a really big parachute. So
yeah, I'm certainly glad for my generation that we mainly have Velcro tops. I don't think I could mess with spring tops at all. Not my thing.
Yes, exactly.
So
yeah, me neither.
I was talking to McKenna, and you guys still fly a lot of Aerostars. Can you kind of talk about the challenging times of getting Aerostar parts nowadays, since they've been almost non-existent for almost 15 years now, at least?
Yeah, so I mean, there's still a supplier, so you can still get a fair amount of stuff. There's obviously certain things in older equipment that are harder to get a hold of. So it really hasn't been horribly hard, but we're really reaching that edge where some parts are going to start getting pretty rare and few and far between. But we very definitely know that there's other wonderful manufacturers out there on the market. Our personal preference is with Lindstrand, and eventually I know we'll own a full Lindstrand system. Obviously we started out kind of going that direction when they picked up the diamond weave from Aerostar and those kind of things, and got real familiar with the factory over there. But most of the brands that you see out there these days, at least the ones that we've seen here in the Northwest, they're all very, very nicely made balloons. And, I love my Zone 5 burners because they're quieter. And so that's always been one of my things. But, they've done a lot of, it's nice to see some of the new burners that are coming out these days and some of the different things. And, someday they'll get quieter again, maybe. They are getting a little bit quieter again. So.
See, the one thing I miss about Aerostar is how they kind of mastered the Aurora, is like the cheap balloon for somebody to get into ballooning. And I feel like that's almost what we miss nowadays. And I have a Lindstrand bottom, and I love it. I mean, it's the best thing I've ever had in ballooning, and with my home built racer, I mean, it's a dream balloon to fly. I just wish somebody would capture that kind of market of a cheap, in your way balloon that's made out of quality fabric and quality parts, and I feel like we lack that currently.
Yeah, I would agree. And Aerostar had their rally system for years, and I used to take that standard pattern and do all kinds of fun different things with it, and you could have all these cuts basically for free. So I agree with you there. The other thing, though, that I'm seeing is, when people are buying a balloon nowadays, they're hanging on to it. And so the used balloon market is, either stuff that's so terribly old or an Aerostar, that it's harder to find good used equipment on the market. And so it keeps those prices high. So it is hard to find entry-level stuff for people to get into. And we see a lot of people buy stuff that, is maybe more porous than it should be. And it sucks because it lasts them a year or so, and then they're already off looking for something else. So, but I also do see a lot more, at least here in the Northwest, a lot more interest in getting into ballooning in the last year or so. I think there's more people interested in flying than I have seen since, late 90s, early 2000s. And if we start seeing some of those people get into it, it'll help drive that used market again. And I think ultimately help bring that price, that entry level price for people down a little bit more. So I certainly hope that's the case.
So we know we talked about how you were training pilots for a while. You've actually trained more students than most pilots in the Northwest. How many have you trained approximately?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I sat down and put a lot of names on paper. I've done instruction with an excess of about 25 people. Now, of those people, I would say about half of them, I followed them all the way through signing them off to get their license, whether it be private or commercial, some both. And then I've done additional, flight with some other people. I had 2 students that I actually decided that I didn't think it would be good for them to continue as pilots. One of them very was very disgruntled about that. He did not make good decisions. And I just couldn't bring myself to say that, hey, we'll sign you off or whatever. And he got mad and just got out of ballooning. Sometimes, the match with the instructor and the student isn't always great, which is why for us, it's always been really good, because Vic and I are completely different pilots. We think completely different. We do things completely differently. He always laughs. If he takes off first, he knows there's no way I'm going to follow him to where he lands, because I just don't want to. It's not the way that I fly, So we can give each other students and say, hey, maybe this person will relate to you better than me, or vice versa, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of nice. So sometimes, if you have a student that you're not getting along with, it makes sense to have somebody else fly with them. But yeah, I've flown with a lot of different people, and I think it's good to do that for the student, to, fly with a couple different people. One of the adages we came up with very early on was different isn't wrong. It's just different. If you get the same result, you could line up 10 ballooning rigs where you look at a rally and walk from trailer to trailer to trailer, and everybody's got their own way of putting their stuff away and how they store it and things like that. And, their flying styles are a lot that way too. We had a flight once where we had 4 different pilots take off from a field and go 4 completely different directions. We all landed in the same place, So everybody does things a little bit differently. They view the conditions a little different. They might do something a little different with their equipment, and different isn't necessarily wrong. It's just different. So I've had a lot of fun experiencing that, both from being a student and from being a trainer over the years.
So what is your best advice for any instructor that wants to train multiple students?
Be organized. Have a file for every student so that you can remember where you're at with those people. Be honest in your notes that you put in there. This person really needs to work on this. That person really needs to work on that. And then make sure that you actually go out and do those things, and you don't just do the same thing over and over. Having a good syllabus is good. The BFA has lots of great resources. I know now there's a lot of different places that you can go for training materials and that kind of stuff. Look at everything everybody's doing and pick what works for you, and put together a syllabus for each student. Pretty much every student, I would kind of gear it toward them and their level of expertise, what they already knew, what came easily for them, that kind of stuff. So, but be prepared and keep lots of good notes.
That's really good advice. So do you have any future goals or plans for yourself in ballooning?
Well, so recently I have started to put together a lot more information on training again. I would like to get back into training a lot more people. And like I said, I think there's more interest now than there has been in a long time. So I want to do some of that. I've always wanted to do a longer flight, 30 to 50 mile flight. But like I said, heights aren't necessarily my thing. And while I'm still okay on a balloon flight, unlike my husband, I don't want to go to, 10,000 feet. In fact, I'd really rather not even go to 5. I do that with students because I have to sometimes. But, if I can do it at a lower altitude and do a long flight, I'd really like to do that. But more for me, it's about going and visiting people I know across the country and flying in different places. I want to fly in New York. I want to fly in Lake Havasu. There's several areas in Utah I'd like to fly. So, we've started talking about traveling and going to see some different places and do some things.
So now we're going to move on to our last portion of the show, where we're going to talk about, our panelist questions and our fan questions. We have 5 that we ask everybody that comes on the show. And then we had some fan send-in question as well.
Okay.
So our first one, what is your favorite Marvel movie?
So I like the humor and the music of Guardians of the Galaxy movies. So, but we've watched all of them, and just watching movies with family is something we all enjoy doing. So you can put any of them on, I'm good.
See, and that's such a harsh contrast to so many guests we've had. We've had quite a few who have never seen a Marvel movie, so it's refreshing to us.
See, I just don't get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a go-to pre-flight meal?
A bottle of water. If I absolutely feel hungry, I'll take a granola bar with me. But, we a lot of times going out to eat afterward, and you hear that from a lot of the panelists. I've seen that on a lot of your shows. that's, that's what we do. We go out afterward. So especially this time of the year, I don't want to eat at 4:00 in the morning.
We might have to switch that, post-flight meal in the future, because that is a very similar answer.
Yeah.
Like many athletes who get a song played when they're introduced and walk out onto the court or walk out onto the field, if you were at a balloon event and got the opportunity to have one, what would your walk-up song be?
Work Hard, Play Harder by Gretchen Wilson.
If you could have one lunch with one ballooning legend, past or present, who do you think that would be?
I have been very lucky because I've helped with a lot of put together different safety seminars and bring in a lot of ballooning legends. And I would say that past legends, I've already had lunch or dinner with pretty much all the ones I would like to do. I would love to sit down and meet some of the people that are going to be future ballooning legends. A lot of the people that, you guys are interviewing, you guys, that kind of stuff. I'd love to spend more time with the younger people in ballooning and kind of learn some of the things that that I don't know, some of the new technologies, ways that you're using your apps in flight, different things like that. So I would go the other direction.
What was the first balloon event you ever flew as a pilot?
Medford, Oregon. It was also my first and only dawn patrol I've ever done. Those guys that do dawn patrol are amazing. It scares the crap out of me to be in my balloon and not be able to see anything until all of a sudden I see something bright underneath me coming up. So not my thing, and that's okay. I like to watch it. I also accidentally, it was the first first place that I ever went to that I was supposed to use an aircraft radio. And I didn't have a place for it in my basket because we didn't fly with aircraft radios, because in the Seattle area, you just stay out of Class B airspace. They don't want to talk to us anyway. So it didn't make sense to take a radio. And I accidentally knocked mine over and keyed it in flight and didn't know it until a plane was circling, because they wanted to land at the airport. Nobody could do anything because all they could hear was my sponsor in my basket talking about everybody in town. Talk about epic fail at your first balloon event.
Oh, no.
So the last thing we're going to go into is the questions that were sent in by fans.
Sure.
So our first one is, what is your favorite balloon that you've designed?
So that one's really hard to answer to. I mean, I could sit here and I say fired up. It was high intensity. You guys don't know what that means. But the very first one that we ever designed, which was that old balloon that we redid, that was kind of ducky. And that one will always have a special place in my heart. But I've got lots.
What is the most unique challenge of having a husband that is also a pilot?
Well, like I said, we have very different, unique styles. I think we both kind of fall into our strengths. Here, you handle this, I'll handle that. But when we're both going out to fly, it's always who gets what crew and who gets which passengers, and trying to kind of figure that out. And it doesn't matter if we decide it the night before or the morning of, he has a new idea.
What is the biggest piece of advice that you have for somebody looking to get into the repair side of ballooning?
Spend some time at the repair station. Repair stations, most of them that I know of, will always take help. Volunteer to help with the annuals and come in and check it out, and then talk to the repair people that are there. It takes a significant amount of time. And if you're really willing to put in that time, most repair stations that I've ever met would gladly take apprentices. So go do it.
Do you have a favorite place to fly?
A favorite place to fly? I have lots of different places for different reasons. The Enumclaw area is beautiful. Over here in Prosser, where we live now, is incredible to fly. But I've flown in Colorado. That was great. Wyoming was great. Everything's got kind of its own thing, I don't know that I've ever been anywhere where I went, wow, this is really ugly. I don't like flying here. So.
Our last fan question comes from viewer Jessica Anderson. What has been one of your biggest learning experiences as a pilot? Something where afterwards you thought, well, that happened and I'm fine, but I don't know that I would do that again, or where your pilot skills were really put to the test?
You know, there's a couple of rallies that we used to fly at that were in downtown metro locations. And I had a flight one, you know, and those kind of flights, you're usually launching in an area where if you need to do a landing quickly, it's going to be in a street or, you know, an intersection or something like that. And you really need to fly out to a place to land. And I find that I don't readily get as excited about doing that these days, because I did have a couple of instances at a couple of those events. You know, one time I took off and was way hotter outside than they predicted it was going to be. There was an inversion. I couldn't get above the inversion. I was too heavy. And all I had was parking lots and cars and streets underneath me. And another time from a similar event, I took off and had a fire on board as I was taking off. And so those things are never fun to do when you're in that kind of situation. So obviously now I say have a very thorough checklist. Make sure your equipment is in top condition and that you check every aspect of the flight before you take off in an area like that. So.
Well, that's going to do it for us this time on BurnerCast. Our next episode, instead of going bi-weekly, we are back next week. We're doing a Team Nationals preview special. We're going to have multiple teams from the event coming on to talk about what they're looking forward to, how they think they're going to do, and things of that sort. Mandy, thank you again for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time on BurnerCast.
Thank you.